3 days after my family barred me from my brother's wedding, a Newport resort billing agent called. "Your final payment of $45,000 declined," she stated, confirming I was the legal guarantor. I never signed a contract, never went inside, and my gift remained in my trunk. My family did not just want to erase me from their perfect photos. They wanted my name and credit to bankroll their status-obsessed dream. I am Victoria Bainbridge. I am 36 years old, and I live in a minimalist apartment in Chicago where the glass is always cold and the noise of the city is reduced to a dull, manageable hum. Professionally, I am a senior forensic cost consultant at North Ledger Advisory. In simple terms, I am the person major corporations and legal firms call when massive amounts of money vanish on commercial megaprojects and the ledgers do not balance. I spend my days meticulously dismantling financial lies. I track phantom vendors, inflated supply invoices, ghost employees, and hidden kickbacks buried deep within thousands of spreadsheet rows. My entire professional existence is built on a single, unwavering premise: numbers never lie. But the people who write them down almost always do. I just never expected to have to apply that premise to my own blood. It was 7 minutes past 8 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, eating a piece of dry toast and drinking black coffee, preparing for a long day of reviewing subcontractor audits for a commercial real estate client. My phone vibrated against the marble countertop. The caller ID displayed a Rhode Island area code. I answered with my standard, crisp, professional greeting. "This is Victoria." "Good morning, Ms. Bainbridge. My name is Sarah, and I'm calling from the Accounts Receivable Department at Halcyon Point Resort in Newport. I am reaching out regarding the final balloon payment for the Harbor Wedding Weekend package." I took a slow, measured sip of my black coffee. I knew exactly whose wedding had taken place at Halcyon Point 3 days ago. It was the wedding of my younger brother, Preston. It was the same meticulously curated wedding I had flown all the way across the country to attend, only to be turned away at the wrought iron security gates by my own mother. "I believe you have the wrong number," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "I was not a guest at that wedding, nor am I responsible for any vendor accounts associated with it." The woman on the other end of the line cleared her throat, clearly reading from a computer monitor. "I understand this might be a confusing situation, but I'm looking directly at the finalized master contract. You are listed as the primary financial sponsor and the personal guarantor for the entire event. The credit card on file for the incidental hold processed successfully, but the final charge for $45,000 was declined by your bank at midnight. We need to secure an alternative payment method immediately to avoid sending this account to our external collections agency." $45,000. Most people would gasp. Most people would drop their coffee mug, start shouting at the representative, or frantically deny everything in a blind panic. I did none of those things. When you spend your entire adult life hunting white-collar criminals and unraveling complex corporate embezzlement schemes, your natural panic response gets permanently rewired into cold, predatory focus. The emotional sister who had been humiliated at the gates 3 days ago instantly vanished. The forensic auditor took over. "Sarah," I said, my tone shifting from polite to surgical, "listen to me very carefully. I am not going to give you a credit card number. I am going to give you an instruction. I want you to open the digital file for that contract right now. I want you to export the full, unredacted scan of the final agreement, including every single payment addendum and minimum spend clause. Furthermore, if this document was signed electronically, I require the complete security audit trail. I want the IP addresses, the exact digital timestamps, the geographic location data, and the comprehensive document edit history. I want all of it emailed to me before we conclude this conversation. Ms. Bainbridge, I cannot just release internal financial documents without managerial approval, and we need to settle this balance. You are claiming I owe your employer $45,000 based on a legal document I have never seen and never signed. I interrupted smoothly, my voice dropping an octave. "Send the file, Sarah, or my next phone call is not to you. but to the Rhode Island Attorney General to file a formal report regarding corporate extortion and wire fraud. There was a heavy pause on the line. I could hear the rapid clicking of a mouse. "I am sending it to the email address on file right now," she stammered. While I waited for the email to arrive, I did not sit still. I opened my personal banking application on my laptop. For over a decade, I had maintained a joint checking account and 2 authorized user credit cards for my mother and Preston. They always called it the emergency fund. They claimed it was strictly for sudden medical deductibles, unexpected car repairs, or bridging the gap between Preston's endless string of failed startup ventures. I navigated straight to the security settings. With 4 rapid clicks, I froze the credit lines. I locked the checking account completely. I permanently revoked every single digital access privilege attached to my name that did not belong strictly to me. I severed the financial umbilical cord that had drained my resources and my patience for years. A soft chime from my inbox signaled the arrival of the resort's email. I opened the encrypted PDF document. It was a 70-page digital file, detailing a legacy tier weekend of unimaginable and reckless excess. My eyes scanned over line items that made absolutely no financial sense for a man who did not own his own car. But I skipped the imported champagne invoices, the custom floral budget, and the private yacht rental fees. I scrolled straight down to page 68. The final signature block. There it was, Victoria Bainbridge. Written in dark blue ink, to an untrained eye, or a stressed accounts receivable clerk rushing through her morning calls. It looked entirely legitimate, but I am a forensic investigator. I looked at my own stolen name on the high-resolution scan and immediately saw the mechanical friction. The general shape of the letters mimicked my handwriting, but the structural execution was entirely wrong. The pen pressure was entirely too heavy on the upward strokes, indicating someone moving slowly and deliberately rather than naturally. The rhythm of the signature was hesitant, lacking the fluid, careless speed of ingrained muscle memory, and the capital letter B was formed with a completely closed bottom loop, which is a specific writing habit I had intentionally abandoned during my first year of graduate school. It was a tracing. A very careful, very desperate, and incredibly arrogant tracing. I closed the PDF and opened a new, blank document on my screen. It was time to draft a formal response. I did not address it to Sarah in billing. I addressed it directly to the resort's general counsel and their legal department. "To whom it may concern," I typed, my fingers striking the mechanical keyboard with rhythmic precision. "I formally deny all financial responsibility for the attached master contract. The signature on page 68 is a blatant forgery. This action constitutes criminal identity theft and federal wire fraud. Consider this correspondence a formal litigation hold notice. You are hereby legally required to preserve all digital data, physical documents, security camera footage, server logs, and internal corporate communications regarding the Preston Bainbridge wedding account. Any alteration, deletion, or destruction of this evidence will be considered illegal spoliation of evidence and will be prosecuted." I attached the forged contract, converted my letter to a secure PDF, hit send, and leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair. The apartment was completely silent. I looked at the glowing number on my monitor. $45,000. The deep, agonizing humiliation I had felt 3 days ago standing in my tailored suit outside those iron gates completely evaporated, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. This was no longer a tragic family drama about a sister being unfairly excluded from a celebration. This was a highly calculated financial crime. My mother and my brother had not just blocked me from their picture-perfect day to save face. They had carefully constructed an elaborate, expensive fraud to fund their delusions of grandeur, and they had chosen to build it using my own last name. 3 days before the phone call that changed everything, I stood on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, breathing in the scent of crushed oyster shells and sea salt. I had taken a red-eye flight out of Chicago, arriving in Rhode Island on zero sleep, but fueled by a rare, fragile sense of hope. In my coat pocket sat my phone, holding a digital olive branch from my brother. A text message received 48 hours prior that simply read, I want you there. Let us put the past away. Please come. That single message had been enough to make me rearrange my entire audit schedule, book a wildly expensive last-minute ticket, and drive a rental car straight to the coast. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that beneath the layers of his financial irresponsibility and his desperate need for social validation, he still remembered we were family. In my arms, I carried a heavy rectangular package wrapped in thick, matte silver paper and tied with a navy silk ribbon. It was not a crystal vase from a registry. It was a piece of our shared history. Inside the custom walnut frame lay the original, hand-drawn architectural blueprints of the A-frame lake house our father had spent the last 5 years of his life designing. He had died suddenly of a massive heart attack before they could even pour the foundation. I had spent 6 months tracking down his old firm, negotiating with the retired lead architect to release the archival copies. I had brought it here to remind Preston of who we were before the money ran out and the resentment set in. The venue was an oceanfront estate that smelled of old money and ruthless exclusivity. A sweeping driveway made of imported white gravel crunched beneath the tires of luxury sedans. Manicured emerald lawns rolled down a gentle slope toward a private marina where pristine yachts bobbed in the gray water. It was a masterclass in deliberate, calculated aesthetics. Nothing was out of place. Every hydrangea bush was perfectly pruned, every linen napkin folded to a razor-sharp edge, every guest selected to enhance the overall picture of absolute prestige. I walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone pathway. Ahead, a heavy mahogany check-in podium was guarded by 2 men in dark suits with discreet earpieces. Beyond them, a string quartet played a soft, classical melody that drifted over the manicured hedges. Before I could even reach the podium to state my name, a figure detached itself from the shadow of a massive floral arrangement. It was Elaine Bainbridge, my mother. She wore a tailored pale gold gown that draped flawlessly over her frame. Her hair was styled in an immaculate, stiff wave, and a string of frosted pearls rested against her collarbone. She looked every inch the grieving widow who had triumphantly rebuilt her life. A portrait of dignified grace, but there was no grace in her eyes. There was no warmth, no surprise, no maternal welcome. She did not open her arms to embrace me. She did not offer even a polite, strained smile. She simply stepped directly into the center of the pathway, positioning herself as a human barricade between me and the wrought iron gates. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly modulated, pitched low enough that the security guards could not hear, but sharp enough to cut bone. I tightened my grip on the heavy frame in my arms. "Preston texted me," I replied, keeping my own voice entirely level. "He asked me to come." Elaine did not blink. She turned slightly to the side, checking the thick guest list resting on the mahogany podium. "Your name is not on the registry." The words hung in the crisp ocean air. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach, a familiar sensation I usually reserved for discovering a hidden offshore bank account in a fraud investigation. "He invited me," I repeated, though the conviction in my voice was already turning to ash. "Listen to me very carefully," Elaine said, taking one step closer. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was overwhelming. "The Waverleys are an important family. They expect a certain standard. This entire weekend has been meticulously planned to ensure that standard is met. Today is only for those who will not ruin the image." I looked down at myself. Because of the rushed flight directly from a client meeting in Chicago, I was wearing my tailored charcoal wool work suit, a crisp white blouse, and sensible black heels. It was professional, expensive, and entirely inappropriate for a coastal society wedding. Elaine followed my gaze, her lips curling into a faint, mocking sneer. "Look at you," she whispered harshly. "You look like a construction auditor showing up for a site inspection, not the family of the groom. You reek of the middle class. Victoria, you always have. You wear your job like a shield because you have nothing else. If you walk in there looking like a mid-level accountant, you will embarrass him. You will embarrass me." The humiliation did not hit me in a wave. It seeped into my skin like ice water, freezing my lungs, making it difficult to draw a full breath. I was 36 years old, a senior consultant making a substantial six-figure salary, the person who had quietly paid off my mother's credit cards and my brother's rent more times than I could count. Yet, standing on this imported gravel, I was nothing more than an ugly stain on their perfect canvas. I looked past Elaine's rigid shoulder, through the ornate iron gates, across the vast expanse of the green lawn. Standing near a towering pyramid of champagne glasses was Preston. He looked like a stranger in his bespoke black tuxedo, as if feeling the weight of my stare. He turned his head. Across 50 yards of manicured grass, our eyes met. He saw me. He saw the heavy silver package in my arms. He saw our mother standing directly in my path, physically blocking me from entering his wedding. For 3 agonizing seconds, the world stopped moving. I waited for him to excuse himself from his groomsmen. I waited for him to jog across the lawn, to tell our mother to step aside, to pull me into a hug and welcome me. I waited for the brother who had sent that text message to materialize. Instead, Preston shifted his weight. His jaw tightened. He looked down at the crystal champagne flute in his hand, took a slow sip, and then deliberately turned his back to me. Rejoining his circle of wealthy, approved friends, he chose silence. He chose the image. He chose the lie over the sister standing at the gate. That single, silent turning of his back was worse than any screaming match we had ever had. It was a definitive, physical severing. It was the exact moment I realized that I was not a person to them. I was a utility. When they needed a bill paid, a mess cleaned up, or a problem solved quietly, I was family. When the cameras were flashing and the elite were gathered, I was a liability to be hidden away. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear, refusing to give Elaine the satisfaction of seeing me break. I stepped forward, bypassing my mother entirely, and walked up to the check-in podium. The 2 security guards tensed, but I merely laid the heavy silver-wrapped frame gently onto the polished mahogany surface. I turned back to Elaine. Her eyes darted to the package, a flicker of apprehension finally crossing her perfectly powdered face. "Tell him congratulations," I said softly. I did not wait for her response. I turned on my heel and began the long walk back down the crushed white gravel driveway toward my rental car. As I walked away, the string quartet struck up the soaring, triumphant chords of the bridal processional. The music chased me down the street, bright and joyful and utterly hollow. I drove away from Halcyon Point without looking back in the rearview mirror. I drove in complete silence for 2 hours, watching the Rhode Island coastline blur past the windows. I felt a profound, cavernous emptiness in my chest, but alongside the pain, there was something else, a cold, absolute finality. The relentless, bleeding wound of my familial loyalty had finally been cauterized. Something fundamental had died at those gates, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that it would never be resurrected. For as long as I can remember, I wore a label that most parents bestow as the highest compliment, yet it functions as an invisible prison sentence. I was the reliable child. In the emotional architecture of the Bainbridge household, I was the load-bearing wall. Being reliable did not mean I was the most loved, the most celebrated, or the most cherished. It meant I was the designated fixer. I was the one expected to absorb the shockwaves, to pay the outstanding balances, to keep the ugly secrets buried in the backyard, and above all else, to save the family face. When our father died, the carefully maintained facade of our middle-class prosperity crumbled overnight. The life insurance policy barely covered the mortgage arrears he had been hiding. In the quiet, desperate months that followed his funeral, the dynamic solidified. I had just landed my first junior auditing position, flush with a regular paycheck and a desperate need to keep my grieving mother afloat. It started with small, easily justifiable transfers. I covered a winter heating bill. I paid the annual property taxes. I told myself it was what a good daughter should do. But in families governed by image rather than honesty, A lifeline quickly transforms into an entitlement. The financial bleed eventually shifted from basic survival to funding my brother's reckless existence. Preston always operated under the delusion that he was the protagonist of a massive success story that just had not reached its climax yet. He bounced from one doomed startup venture to another, leaving a trail of shattered leases and defaulted loans in his wake. I became his silent, unacknowledged safety net. I remember the year he leased a luxury loft downtown, claiming he needed a prestigious address to attract venture capitalists. 3 months later, his primary investor pulled out, and he was facing eviction. I paid his back rent. 2 years after that, his personal credit cards were completely maxed out, threatening his ability to secure a business loan. I quietly wired $20,000 to clear the ledgers. The worst incident involved a severe breach of contract on a commercial rental space. The landlord was preparing to drag Preston into civil court, an event that would have publicly humiliated our mother. I stepped in and paid a $5,000 settlement to buy the landlord's silence and keep my brother's name out of the legal system. Every single time I transferred funds, Elaine provided the same practiced, soothing rationalization. "We all have to sacrifice for the family. Victoria," she would say, her tone dripping with a rehearsed martyrdom that placed the burden entirely on my shoulders. "Your brother just needs a little runway to get his ideas off the ground. You have a stable job. You are so lucky to not have his creative pressures." Preston never thanked me. He treated my corporate salary as a communal mutual fund, an endless well of capital that existed solely to finance his lifestyle. My professional success was not viewed as my own achievement. It was viewed as the family's shared resource. Whenever I attempted to close the bank, whenever I tried to set a boundary or demand that Preston take a retail job to pay his own way, the psychological machinery of the family turned against me with vicious speed. The narrative would instantly flip. I was no longer the reliable savior. I was branded as cold. I was labeled selfish. Elaine would weep and tell her friends that I had forgotten my roots, that I was a ruthless corporate drone who cared more about profit margins and spreadsheets than my own flesh and blood. They weaponized my independence, making me feel as though my financial stability was a moral failing if I did not offer it up for their consumption. Because I had spent a decade repeatedly pulling Preston out of the financial wreckage of his own making, I understood the fundamental architecture of his psychology better than a therapist. In my line of work, you learn to categorize the different types of white-collar offenders. Preston was a textbook image-conscious parasite. He possessed absolutely no fear of debt. A negative balance in a bank account was just abstract math to him. It caused him no anxiety, no sleepless nights. The only thing Preston truly feared was public exposure. He was terrified of being perceived as a failure, of being unmasked as a fraud in front of the wealthy circles he so desperately wanted to infiltrate. He did not care if he owed money, as long as the people in his country club did not know he owed money. Sitting in my quiet apartment, running this psychological profile through my mind, a chilling realization locked into place. The forgery was not a crime of passion. It was not a panicked, last-minute decision made by desperate people with zero options. It was a highly calculated, risk-assessed maneuver based entirely on my historical data. They faked my signature because they were absolutely certain I would follow my established behavioral pattern. They bet the house on my discretion. They knew I despised messy public scandals just as much as they did, though for very different reasons. Their entire plan hinged on the assumption that once the event was over and the final bill came due, I would be so horrified by the legal threats and the potential damage to my own professional reputation that I would simply surrender. They believed I would quietly pay the $45,000 to make the problem disappear. Just like I had paid the rent, the credit cards, and the legal settlements of the past, they did not steal my identity to destroy me. They stole it because they thought they owned it. I pulled my laptop closer, dismissing the external correspondence entirely. The forensic auditor in me was fully awakened, and the target was no longer a corporate client. The target was my own life. I opened a new, encrypted spreadsheet and began pulling every piece of personal financial data I could access. I initiated comprehensive pulls from all three major credit bureaus. I downloaded 10 years of bank statements, tax returns, and wire transfer logs. I needed to know the true scope of the infection. If they were bold enough to forge a major contract for a luxury event, I had to assume this was not an isolated incident. This was merely the part of the iceberg that had finally breached the surface. I started searching for the hidden decay. I looked for unauthorized credit inquiries, phantom utility bills registered at old addresses, small recurring charges that I might have dismissed as administrative fees over the years. I approached my own history with the cold, detached suspicion I usually reserved for embezzling executives. I spent 4 hours tracing every line item, dissecting the manipulative mechanisms of my family like a coroner dissecting a rotting, diseased structure. I mapped the exact dates of their emotional manipulation against the dates of my financial capitulation. The correlation was a perfect, devastating 100%. The numbers laid bare the brutal reality of my existence within that family unit. I was not a daughter, and I was not a sister. I was a sovereign wealth fund, and they were the corrupt politicians draining it dry while smiling for the cameras. I closed my eyes, the glow of the screen burning against my eyelids. For 36 years, I had functioned as their ultimate safety measure. I had been the soft landing pad for every reckless jump Preston had ever made, cushioned by Elaine's enabling lies. But as I sat there in the silence of my own independence, I made a silent, irrevocable vow. The bank was permanently closed. The shock absorber was broken. When they inevitably fell this time, they were going to hit the concrete. I would not be the landing pad for anyone ever again. My phone rang again shortly before noon. This time, the caller ID did not belong to a panicked billing clerk seeking a quick credit card number. It was the direct line for the legal department of Halcyon Point Resort. I answered on the second ring, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "Victoria Bainbridge," I stated. A sharp, polished voice responded, echoing the acoustics of a corner office. "Ms. Bainbridge, my name is Mara Quinn. I am the in-house legal counsel for Halcyon Point Resort. I am calling regarding your litigation hold notice and the outstanding balance of $45,000. Let me be perfectly clear from the outset. Claiming forgery to avoid a contractual obligation after a luxury event has concluded is a serious allegation, and we are fully prepared to litigate to recover our losses." I did not raise my voice. I did not match her aggressive energy. I simply leaned closer to the microphone and let the weight of my professional reality settle over the line. "Ms. Quinn, my area of expertise is corporate forensic cost analysis. I spend my 70-hour work weeks dismantling fraudulent vendor contracts, tracing laundered assets, and testifying as an expert witness for Fortune 500 companies. If you want to litigate a forged document across state lines, I will gladly bury your resort in discovery requests until the end of the decade. I will subpoena your entire IT department. But if you want to find out who actually defrauded your employer and constructed this financial liability, I suggest you stop threatening me and start looking at the metadata embedded in your own administrative files." There was a heavy silence on the line. The aggressive posture dissolved. When Mara spoke again, the hostility was gone, replaced by the cautious, measured cadence of a fellow professional recognizing a peer. "What exactly do you need me to look at?" she asked. "I need everything your billing department did not send the first time," I instructed, my tone shifting into pure operational command. "I want the minimum spend addendums. I want the itemized list of every single incidental service billed to that master account. I need the security guarantee for the presidential suite, the charter agreement for the private yacht party, and the itemized penalty charges for the last-minute cancellation of the harbor fireworks display. Do not redact a single line item and include the full digital trail." The files arrived 15 minutes later via a secure corporate portal. I opened the communications log first. I needed to see how the resort had been communicating with their supposed guarantor for months without my knowledge. The answer was glaringly simple and ruthlessly effective. The contact email listed on the master account was not my actual address. It was a fabricated address, identical to my professional email save for a single, transposed letter. They had swapped a lowercase letter I for a lowercase letter L. To an exhausted event coordinator scanning a screen, it looked perfectly legitimate. It was a classic diversionary tactic, a burner channel specifically constructed to intercept all billing notifications, automated reminders, and contract drafts before they ever reached my actual inbox. Next, I examined the digital signature audit trail provided by the electronic signature software. A digital signature is never just a name on a screen. It is a complex web of geographical and technical data. The IP address attached to the final execution of the contract was not masked by a virtual private network. I ran a quick geographical trace using standard analytical tools. The location pinged back to a residential broadband provider in a specific, quiet suburb in Ohio. It was the exact municipality where my mother, Elaine, currently lived. The pieces were locking together with sickening precision. I opened the source properties of the primary financial guarantee document, which had been manually uploaded to the resort portal by a user registered as v.bainbridge. The uploaded image was a photograph of a printed form. By extracting the exchangeable image file format data, the hidden metadata embedded within the photo itself, I found the device specifications. The photo was taken with a specific smartphone model. I cross-referenced the device model and the operating system version with the family cellular data plan I had managed until this very morning. The device was actively registered to Elaine's dedicated phone line. But the most damning evidence, the detail that cut through the clinical detachment of my investigation, was tucked at the very end of the digital binder. To secure a line of credit that large, the resort naturally required proof of liquidity. Appended to the final contract was a high-resolution scan of my federal tax return from 2 years ago, alongside a notarized signature sample pulled directly from a commercial real estate closing file I had executed when purchasing my Chicago apartment. These were not public records. These were not documents you could pull from a careless internet search or a background check service. These were physical, paper documents. They were confidential records I had stored in a locked, fireproof lockbox inside my mother's house during my transition from graduate school to my first corporate firm. I had left them there, believing they were safe. Only a person with unrestricted physical access to the innermost sanctum of my life could have procured them. I picked up my phone and dialed Mara Quinn's direct extension. She answered immediately, dispensing with the corporate greeting entirely. "Did you review the logs?" I asked. "I did," Mara replied, her tone hushed and strictly business. "Ms. Bainbridge, I owe you a sincere apology. The IP logs combined with the burner email address establish a clear, undeniable pattern of malicious misrepresentation. Halcyon Point is not looking to harass a victim of identity theft. We are looking at a massive, unrecoverable financial loss, and my primary duty is to protect the resort from the actual perpetrators. Then we have a mutual interest," I stated, tapping my pen against the desk. "I need you to lock down your end of the evidence. The perpetrators will likely try to cover their tracks once they realize the final payment bounced and the credit lines are frozen." Mara was already steps ahead, operating with the cold efficiency of a corporate lawyer preparing for war. "I have placed a hard preservation lock on the entire internal server file," she confirmed. "Nothing can be altered or deleted. I am personally archiving the lobby and front desk security camera footage from the 48 hours leading up to the ceremony. I am also pulling the physical handwritten notes from our event coordinators and the recorded phone logs of every conversation between our staff and the groom prior to the wedding. I will share whatever I legally can with your counsel." I thanked her and disconnected the line. By then, I had enough. The burner email, the Ohio IP address, and the stolen tax documents all pointed in the same direction. This had been planned weeks in advance. What I still did not understand was why they had been so desperate to keep me away from the venue itself. The glowing screen of my monitor cast long, sharp shadows across my kitchen island. I had spent the last 2 hours dissecting the itemized addendums Mara Quinn had forwarded from the resort's accounting department. In my line of work, You learn very quickly that the most profound human failures are rarely found in dramatic confessions. They are buried in the banal details of an invoice. As I scrolled through the endless rows of authorized charges, the sheer scale of the deception began to take shape. The outstanding balance of $45,000 was not simply a missing final installment or a minor miscalculation of the catering headcount. It was the catastrophic fallout of a man attempting to buy an identity he could not afford. Preston had not just booked a venue, he had aggressively upgraded the entire weekend to the resort's most exclusive package, internally designated as the Legacy tier. The numbers on the screen painted a grotesque portrait of unearned luxury. There was a 3-night reservation for the presidential suite, complete with a dedicated butler service. There was a private, catered sunset cruise on a 60-foot chartered yacht for the bridal party. He had authorized a rare vintage whiskey tasting bar for the reception, hired a supplemental 12-piece orchestral ensemble to accompany the dinner service, and secured a sprawling, decadent Sunday brunch featuring imported caviar and bottomless champagne. Every single stroke of the pen on that forged contract was a desperate attempt to match the financial gravity of his new in-laws. The Waverley family possessed generations of quiet, established wealth. According to the notes in the resort's client relationship management file, Preston had consistently assured everyone that he was handling the groom's financial responsibilities through a private family trust. He had spun an elaborate, intoxicating fairy tale of quiet Bainbridge affluence. He played the role of the humble, tech-savvy heir perfectly. The reality, hidden beneath those crisp linen napkins and crystal flutes, was a structure entirely eaten by rot. I knew the truth of his finances better than anyone. His latest software startup had quietly collapsed 6 months ago, burying him beneath a mountain of undisclosed personal debt. His credit score was likely a smoking crater, rendering him completely ineligible to secure even a standard auto loan, let alone act as the financial anchor for a 6-figure luxury event. The resort's underwriting department would have taken one look at his actual financial profile and demanded full payment up front. He needed a pristine credit history. He needed a ghost sponsor. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The silence of my apartment felt heavy, pregnant with the echoes of conversations I had not been present for, but could reconstruct with chilling accuracy. I knew my mother's tactical mind. When Preston realized he was going to lose face in front of the Waverleys, he would have panicked. Elaine would have been the one to calm him down. She would have poured him a drink, sat him at her kitchen table in Ohio, and laid out the solution with terrifying sociopathic clarity. I could almost hear her exact words, spoken in that hushed, conspiratorial tone she always used when justifying her betrayals. "Your sister lives alone," she would have told him. "She has money sitting in accounts doing absolutely nothing, and you know how she is. Preston, she hates public humiliation more than anything in the world. If we just put her name down, by the time she finds out, it will be too late. She will be so embarrassed by the legal threats and the potential scandal that she will just pay it to keep it quiet. It is just an advance on your inheritance." It was a flawless, predatory assessment of my character, weaponized to serve their greed. But as I stared at the chronological timestamps on the billing ledger, a much darker, much more profound realization struck me. It hit with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Then the itinerary answered the question. I had arrived almost exactly when the resort expected the primary guarantor. If I had reached the desk and shown my identification, the staff would have recognized my name and exposed the fraud on the spot. Elaine had not blocked me out of snobbery alone. She had blocked me to keep the scheme alive until the vows were done. In that instant, the humiliation at the gate stopped feeling personal and became evidence. The immediate consequence of severing a financial artery is the sudden, frantic flailing of the parasite. It took exactly 14 hours for the reality of my locked accounts to hit them. The first decline transaction occurred at a luxury car rental agency at 9 o'clock the next morning, followed swiftly by a rejected charge at an upscale bridal boutique where Elaine was attempting to purchase a post-wedding commemorative gift. When they called the bank to demand an override, They were met with an automated message stating the primary account holder had reported fraudulent activity. They realized instantly that the quiet, compliant daughter had finally bolted the doors. Elaine did not call me. She did not attempt to text me an apology or beg for a private reconciliation. When a manipulator loses their private control over a target, their immediate instinct is to seize control of the public narrative. By noon, my phone began to buzz incessantly with notifications, forwarded links, and screenshots sent by a handful of sympathetic cousins who watched the digital explosion in real time. Elaine had taken to social media, dropping a massive, meticulously crafted manifesto across 3 different platforms. She attached a beautifully filtered photograph of Preston and his new bride cutting their 6-tier cake, juxtaposed against a multi-paragraph caption designed to assassinate my character before I could even speak. The post was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. She wrote that her heart was completely shattered by the sheer cruelty of her eldest daughter. She claimed that I had been consumed by a bitter, unnatural jealousy over my brother's happiness, and that I had deliberately tried to sabotage the most important weekend of his life. She wove a tragic tale of a wealthy, successful woman who had become so obsessed with corporate ladders and financial spreadsheets that she had lost all capacity for human empathy. According to Elaine, I had maliciously pulled my promised financial support at the 11th hour, attempting to strand the newlyweds with crushing debt purely out of spite. The social ecosystem that my mother had cultivated for decades responded exactly as she had engineered it to. The comment sections flooded with absolute outrage. Distant relatives who had not spoken to me in 15 years chimed in to express their disgust. My mother's old country club acquaintances and several board members from her local community charity groups left paragraphs of condemnation, calling me a heartless spinster, an unnatural sister, and a woman who deserved to die alone with her bank accounts. They praised Elaine for her strength in the face of such familial betrayal. For a brief, agonizing moment, staring at the vitriol glowing on my screen, the human side of me wanted to scream. I wanted to log on, upload the forged contract, post the metadata proving the Ohio Internet Protocol address, and publicly humiliate every single person defending her. But I am a forensic investigator. I know that mud wrestling with a pig only leaves you dirty, while the pig enjoys it. Responding to a public smear campaign only validates the premise of the argument and gives the aggressor the exact chaotic engagement they crave. I turned off my phone notifications, placed the device face down on my desk, and went to war the only way I knew how. I picked up my office line and called Naomi Kerr. Naomi was a senior partner at Kerr Hollow Legal, a boutique firm occupying the top 3 floors of a glass high-rise downtown. She did not practice family law or handle domestic disputes. Naomi was a ruthless civil litigator who specialized in corporate asset recovery, complex financial litigation, and aggressive counter-fraud measures. We had worked together on a massive embezzlement case 2 years prior, and I knew she possessed the exact temperature of cold, unyielding aggression that this situation required. I sat in her corner office an hour later, laying out the printed logs, the forged addendums, and the metadata files. Naomi reviewed the documents in absolute silence. When she finally looked up, her expression was predatory. They actually utilized a burner email and forged a signature across state lines for a luxury service contract, Naomi said, her voice a sharp, professional purr. And then your mother went on the internet to defame you while the ink on the felony was still wet. They brought a Facebook post to a federal fraud fight. Victoria. I need them locked into their own narrative, I told her, my voice perfectly steady. I need every single exit door permanently sealed before they realize the resort's legal department is already cooperating with me. Naomi drafted the preservation letters immediately. These were not polite requests. They were aggressive, legally binding notices of impending litigation. She dispatched them via certified mail and licensed process servers to Halcyon Point Resort, to Elaine's residence in Ohio, to Preston's leased apartment, and to the third-party event management company that had orchestrated the wedding. The demands were exhaustive and suffocating. Naomi legally compelled them to freeze and preserve all electronic data, Every frame of security camera footage, the handwritten reception desk logs, the cellular tower history of their mobile devices, and the scanned copies of any identification presented at check-in. She demanded the wireless network registries from the resort to prove exactly which devices were connected when the forged documents were uploaded. She requested every logistical invoice, down to the catering receipts. Any attempt to delete an email, shred a post-it note, or wipe a hard drive after receiving this letter would result in a separate, devastating charge of spoliation of evidence. While Naomi constructed the civil trap, I executed the administrative protocol. I drove to the local police precinct and formally filed a report for criminal identity theft, sitting in a sterile room and speaking to a detective for 2 hours. I obtained the official incident number and immediately forwarded it to the fraud investigation units of the 3 major credit bureaus, placing a hard, impenetrable freeze on my Social Security number. I filed a comprehensive affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission, ensuring that my stolen financial identity was flagged on a national level. There was one final, crucial flank to secure: my career. When you manage millions of dollars in corporate investigations, your professional reputation is your only currency. If a client even suspects that you are involved in a personal financial scandal, they will pull their contracts instantly. I knew Elaine. When she realized the social media shaming was not forcing me to pay the $45,000, she would escalate. She would find the contact information for the senior partners at North Ledger Advisory and attempt to poison my professional well. I did not wait for her to strike. I scheduled an emergency meeting with the managing director of my division and the head of internal compliance. I sat at the mahogany conference table and slid a redacted copy of the police report across the polished wood. I did not ask for their sympathy, nor did I frame it as a personal tragedy. I presented it as a proactive risk management briefing. I am currently the victim of a sophisticated identity theft operation perpetrated by estranged family members, I informed them, keeping my tone strictly clinical. They have forged my signature on a massive liability contract. I have engaged outside counsel, filed the necessary criminal reports, and locked down my credit. However, given the perpetrator's erratic behavior, there is a high probability they will attempt to contact this firm to maliciously damage my standing and pressure me into dropping the charges. I am opening an independent human resources file today. I want a strict firewall established. Any calls from Elaine Bainbridge or Preston Bainbridge are to be intercepted by legal, recorded, and routed directly to my attorney. My managing director looked at the police report, then looked up at me with profound professional respect. They did not see a messy family drama. They saw a senior consultant executing flawless crisis management. The firewall was approved and implemented within 30 minutes. By 6 o'clock that evening, I walked out of my office building into the cool Chicago air. My phone was still silently collecting hundreds of hateful comments from people who thought they understood the narrative. The internet believed I was a coward, hiding in my apartment, weeping over my ruined reputation and my family's unified rejection. They thought I was backed into a corner, paralyzed by the weight of their collective judgment. They were entirely wrong, while they were loudly screaming in the digital public square, congratulating themselves on their moral superiority. I was moving in absolute silence. I had laid the tripwires. I had closed the administrative borders. I had weaponized my own industry against them. I was not hiding in a corner. I was standing outside the perimeter, quietly pouring gasoline, and simply waiting for the legal mandates to strike the match. It was shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning. The relentless hum of the Chicago traffic had finally faded into a sparse, occasional whisper against the thick glass of my living room windows. I was still awake, bathed in the harsh, blue light of my dual monitors, meticulously cross-referencing the resort's minimum spend addendums with the fraudulent email account recovery logs Naomi had procured. I was building a fortress of data, brick by digital brick. Then, a single notification chimed in the absolute silence of my apartment. A new email had arrived in my secure personal inbox. I glanced at the sender name, expecting an update from my attorney or an automated alert from a credit monitoring bureau. Instead, The name displayed on the screen made my hand freeze over the mouse. Celeste Waverly. She had not even changed her email address to include my brother's last name. The subject line was blank. The preview text contained a single, chilling sentence. I think we have both been played. I opened the message. There was no polite preamble, no superficial greeting from the woman who had officially become my sister-in-law less than a week ago. The email was a raw, frantic confession, the digital equivalent of a woman tearing off a suffocating mask. Victoria, the email began, I am writing this from the guest bedroom of my parents' house. I left Preston sleeping in our apartment 3 hours ago. I need you to know that until yesterday afternoon, I had absolutely no idea you were the personal guarantor for the wedding weekend. When the resort billing department originally required a security sponsor for the legacy tier package, Preston told my father he was utilizing a pre-established family holding arrangement. He used all the right financial terminology. He made it sound like a generationally managed trust fund that had been set up by your late father. Because my family operates with similar structures, we did not question it. We assumed the Bainbridge family simply kept their wealth quiet and tightly controlled. I leaned back in my chair, digesting the sheer audacity of his lie. A family holding arrangement. Preston had taken the pathetic reality of his reliance on my bank accounts and dressed it up in the vocabulary of the ultra-wealthy. He had sold the Waverly family a phantom empire, and he had used my stolen credit profile as the cornerstone. The next morning, Mara sent the proof that turned suspicion into certainty. Security footage of Elaine and Preston scanning my documents in the resort business center. Internal notes showing Elaine had falsely claimed I approved the paperwork remotely, and confirmation that the fake mailbox and burner email had been set up weeks earlier. When I reopened the contract, I realized the supporting credit page came from the mortgage packet I had signed years ago to save Elaine's house. She had kept my data all that time. This was not one reckless wedding lie. It was the final harvest of a system they had built around exploiting me. The legal and administrative machinery I had activated operated with terrifying efficiency. Subpoenas, civil preservation orders, and criminal inquiries do not care about delicate family dynamics or social media narratives. Within 48 hours of Naomi Kerr filing our initial motions, the protective walls my mother and brother had built around themselves completely disintegrated. Halcyon Point Resort had officially aligned with my legal counsel, informing Preston and Elaine that the corporate hospitality group would be cooperating fully with the federal fraud investigation rather than attempting to coerce me into covering the fraudulent balance. The immediate consequence of that reality check walked right through the heavy glass doors of my Chicago office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing a deposition transcript when the internal line on my desk chimed. My receptionist sounded deeply uncomfortable, stating that 2 individuals claiming to be my immediate family members had bypassed the ground floor security desk by tailgating a delivery courier and were currently demanding to see me. Before I could instruct her to call the building guards, my office door violently swung open. Elaine and Preston stood in the doorway. The visual contrast between the arrogant, perfectly styled aristocrats I had seen at the Newport estate and the 2 people standing on my office carpet was staggering. The glamorous facade had entirely evaporated. Preston looked physically hollowed out. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt, his posture slumped and dark. Heavy bags shadowed his eyes, betraying days of severe insomnia. Elaine looked even worse. Her immaculate, composed matriarch persona was gone. Her hands were visibly trembling as she clutched a damp tissue, and her eyes darted frantically around my spacious corner office, taking in the mahogany furniture and the expansive view of the city skyline as if she were a trapped animal calculating an escape route. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I merely closed the file folder on my desk and rested my hands flat against the polished wood. "Close the door behind you," I instructed, my voice maintaining the absolute, freezing calm of a board meeting. Preston pushed the glass door shut. The silence in the room became absolute, thick with the undeniable weight of the shifting power dynamic. They had come here hoping to find the obedient, emotional sister they had manipulated for decades. Instead, They found the senior forensic auditor waiting for them on her own territory. Elaine immediately deployed her oldest, most practiced weapon. She began to weep. It was a loud, theatrical display of maternal despair. "Victoria, please," she sobbed, stepping forward and gripping the edge of my desk. "You have to stop these lawyers. You have to call off the police. The resort is threatening to file grand larceny charges against your brother. We were just borrowing your name, sweetheart. It was a temporary measure in a moment of absolute crisis. I swear to you on my life, we were going to pay you back every single cent the moment the wedding dust settled and Preston secured his new funding. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to prison over a simple misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," Preston interrupted, his tone violently oscillating. One second he was attempting to project authority, and the next he sounded like a terrified adolescent. "You are completely overreacting to this, Victoria. You always do this. You are trying to ruin my entire life over some administrative paperwork. You have the money. You know I'm good for it. And it was not even my fault. The Waverleys are ruthless. They demanded the private yacht. They pressured me into upgrading the catering and the floral arrangements. If I had told them I needed to scale back, they would have canceled the entire wedding. I had no choice." I listened to them spin their pathetic, contradictory narratives without interrupting. I did not debate the morality of their actions. I did not demand an apology for the cruel things Elaine had said to me at the gates of the estate. Nor did I mention the vicious social media campaign she had launched to destroy my reputation. Arguing about feelings validates the premise that this was a family dispute. I was not operating in the realm of family anymore. I was operating in the realm of empirical data. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I retrieved 3 distinct, neatly printed documents and placed them deliberately onto the center of the desk, sliding them forward so they rested directly under the harsh glare of the overhead light. "I am not interested in your tears, Elaine, and I am certainly not interested in your excuses. Preston," I said, my tone stripping away the last remaining layers of the room's oxygen, "I want you to look at the paperwork sitting in front of you." Elaine swallowed hard, her crying abruptly stopping as she looked down. Preston leaned over her shoulder. I slid the evidence across the desk, the scanner image, the timeline of the fake email and mailbox, and the text thread proving they had kept me from the financial desk on purpose. I did not need to explain what it meant. One look at the stack was enough to tell them the story was over. "Celeste," Elaine whispered, her voice cracking in genuine shock. She looked at Preston, sheer panic replacing her previous theatrical sorrow. Celeste gave her those messages. She talked to her. The revelation that the pristine, wealthy bride had not only discovered the truth, but had actively defected to my side shattered the final pillar of Preston's sanity. The facade of the stressed, misunderstood groom vanished completely. His face contorted in a mask of pure, ugly rage. He slammed his fist down onto the back of a leather guest chair. "That completely useless woman," Preston spat out, his voice laced with venomous disgust. "She was supposed to just stand there, smile for the cameras, and look pretty. She had one job. I gave her the perfect weekend. I gave her everything she demanded, and she stabs me in the back over some text messages." He had finally revealed his true face. Right there in my office, he confirmed exactly what I had always known. He did not love Celeste. He did not value her. She was nothing more than a wealthy accessory, another prop in his relentless pursuit of status, just as I was nothing more than a walking bank account. I stood up slowly, ensuring I was looking down at both of them. "You came here today under the delusion that this is a negotiation about $45,000, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "You thought if you cried enough, or blamed the bride's family enough, I would drop the charges and cover the venue debt. You are entirely incorrect. I am not simply suing for the removal of the fraudulent debt." I leaned forward, planting my hands firmly on the desk. "My civil litigator has finalized the countersuit. I am personally suing both of you for criminal identity theft, attempted federal wire fraud, and severe reputational harm resulting from your defamatory public statements. I am also seeking comprehensive restitution for every single hour of legal fees I have incurred dismantling your lies. By the time my attorneys are finished with you, you will not have a single asset left to your names. You will be entirely bankrupt, and you will face the criminal justice system completely alone." Elaine covered her mouth with both hands, a choked, agonizing gasp escaping her throat. She looked at me, truly looking at me for the first time in my entire life, and she finally recognized the monster she had meticulously created through years of financial abuse. Preston said absolutely nothing. He stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, utterly defeated by the realization that his sister was going to burn his life to the ground. "Get out of my office," I ordered softly. "Before I call building security and have you removed for trespassing." They turned around and walked out. They did not look back. The heavy glass door swung shut behind them, sealing them out of my life permanently. I sat back down in my leather chair, the silence returning to the room. Less than 60 seconds later, my cellular phone vibrated against the desk. It was an automated notification from the county court scheduling system. The preliminary hearing for the civil damages and the criminal injunction had been officially set on the calendar. The date was locked in. The final knots of our family history were about to be violently untied under the unforgiving lights of a courtroom, and I was entirely ready to cut the rope. The air in the county courthouse was heavily conditioned and smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper. We were seated in a combined evidentiary hearing, a unique procedural intersection where my civil suit for damages collided directly with the preliminary testimonies for the state's criminal fraud investigation. I sat completely still beside Naomi Kerr at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Elaine and Preston looked remarkably small. Mara Quinn sat in the gallery behind my table, representing Halcyon Point Resort, and 2 rows behind her sat Celeste. Elaine took the stand first. She wore a conservative navy dress, devoid of her usual ostentatious jewelry. She immediately attempted to deploy the exact same performance she had rehearsed her entire life. She wept softly, dabbing her eyes, telling the judge that she was just a misunderstood mother trying to facilitate her son's happiness. "It was just a temporary family arrangement," Elaine sobbed. "I always intended to manage the balance. You do not send a mother to jail over a wedding invoice." Preston followed, projecting a pathetic, defensive arrogance. Under oath, he vehemently insisted the entire situation was being blown out of proportion by an estranged, vindictive sister. "It was an internal family agreement," Preston stated, adjusting his tie with shaking hands. "It should never have been criminalized. Families help each other out during major life events." Then, Naomi Kerr stood up. She did not argue with their emotions. She simply activated the courtroom projector. For the next 45 minutes, Naomi systematically dismantled their entire fabricated reality. She presented the digital logs of the fabricated email address. She submitted the lease agreement for the remote post office box Elaine had rented weeks prior. She played the high-definition security footage of my mother and brother utilizing the business center scanner. She walked the judge through the embedded metadata of the forged signature files. Finally, she projected the damning text message thread detailing their explicit, coordinated plan to keep me physically blocked from the venue gates. "This was not an internal family agreement," Naomi declared, her voice ringing off the wood-paneled walls. "This was a highly sophisticated, premeditated conspiracy to commit identity theft and federal wire fraud across state lines." The heaviest blow, however, did not come from the forensic data. It came from the bride. When Celeste was called to the stand, the entire courtroom went dead silent. She looked pristine, untouchable, and utterly detached. She informed the court that she had officially filed for an annulment a mere 4 days after the ceremony. I had no knowledge of this fraud. Celeste testified under oath, her voice steady and echoing with aristocratic finality. "My former husband assured my family he possessed independent wealth. On the Sunday following the ceremony, I personally overheard him mocking the situation regarding the declined payment. He explicitly stated that his sister would swallow the humiliation and just pay it to keep the family quiet." Preston physically flinched at her words. Elaine buried her face in her hands. Mara Quinn stepped up next, delivering the final corporate strike. She formally stated on the record that Halcyon Point Resort had been deliberately defrauded through the submission of falsified documents. She confirmed the hospitality group was officially shifting the entire liability of the $45,000 directly onto Preston and Elaine Bainbridge, and that the resort would cooperate completely with the district attorney's criminal prosecution. Naomi called Preston back to the stand for cross-examination. She backed him into a relentless, suffocating corner regarding his financial timeline. She demanded to know how he ever planned to pay the debt if he claimed it was just a temporary hold. Under the crushing weight of the evidence and the public humiliation of his annulled bride sitting in the gallery, Preston finally cracked. His carefully constructed veneer shattered, revealing the desperate, entitled parasite underneath. "I just needed a few weeks," Preston shouted, his voice echoing shrilly across the room. "I just needed to buy time until the wedding gifts cleared and the trust fund disbursements from the bride's side of the family were unlocked. If Victoria had just kept her mouth shut, the money would have been there." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the judge slowly lowered his glasses. With that single, furious outburst, Preston had personally destroyed his own defense. He had just confessed, on the official court record, that his entire marriage was a financial transaction designed to secure the Waverly family funds to cover his fraudulent debts. The gavel came down with absolute finality. The judge issued a sweeping ruling. I was immediately and permanently severed from any financial liability regarding the resort contract. The court granted Naomi permission to relentlessly pursue the restitution of my legal fees, while simultaneously referring the overwhelming mountain of evidence directly to the state prosecutor for felony indictment on the charges of identity theft and wire fraud. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The social empire my mother had sacrificed everything to climb publicly collapsed. The community charities stripped Elaine of her board seats, and the country club quietly revoked her membership. She became a pariah, isolated in her Ohio suburb, waiting for her criminal trial. Preston lost absolutely everything. He lost his wealthy bride, his affluent social standing, his flawless gentleman facade, and the ultimate safety net he had exploited for his entire adult life. He was left facing massive corporate debt and a looming prison sentence entirely alone. When the first court-ordered restitution payment finally cleared my accounts months later, I did not absorb it back into my own savings. I established a small, private legal defense fund specifically designed to provide retainer fees for women actively attempting to escape financial abuse perpetrated by their own family members. It was a silent, powerful way of paying for the future, rather than eternally paying off the debts of the past. On a crisp, freezing morning, I stood entirely alone on the concrete edge of Lake Michigan. The wind was violently cold, whipping my coat around my legs, but the sky above the water was a brilliant, unblemished blue. I listened to the rhythmic crashing of the dark waves and took a deep, unobstructed breath. I finally understood the profound truth about survival. The most beautiful, devastating revenge was not inflicting pain upon them to mirror the pain they had caused me. The ultimate revenge was simply walking away, leaving them to drown in the consequences of their own actions, and forcing them to live out the rest of their miserable lives in a world where my name would never, ever be their backup wallet again. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. I invite you to subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.